Ditching VR controllers for hand-based input is really appealing to a lot of people, and there's only two options for that. Optical hand tracking, which isn't super ideal under a lot of conditions, and VR gloves, which tend to be pretty expensive on top of requiring additional money for a tracking solution. Well, what if there was a pair of gloves that was cheaper than an index controller and let you track them with the controllers that your headset comes with? These are the HigVR gloves, and they do just that. Most other gloves are in the $500 plus range. These are $250. If you don't want to use a Lighthouse or Vive Ultimate tracker for tracking, you don't have to, since you can just attach a controller from your headset to track them. They sound great, and I really want to like them, but there's some problems. First though, what's in the box? You get this carrying case, the gloves themselves, the dongle, just the one for both gloves, which is nice since some require one for each glove, and then your chosen mount. I got 2 different mounts because I'm special. Now is a great time to say that I did get a 50% discount on these things because I'm a content creator. I paid $125 for the gloves and $60 for shipping. Don't worry though, that won't stop me from saying anything negative about these things. So compared to other gloves, the Hig gloves just have less features. They only support finger curl and not splay. At this price point, I don't think that's totally unreasonable, but it's worth mentioning that EOS immersive gloves will be starting at like $275 and will have splay. The Hig gloves are basically just a Valve Index controller in the form of a glove. Even without splay, I find not having to hold a controller more immersive than holding one, and you also have a little bit more control over your fingers than you would on something like an Index controller. The gloves do have a controller module on them. You get your standard ABXY, 2 joysticks that can be clicked down, and 2 system buttons. I'm gonna be honest, I'm kinda concerned about the longevity of this thing. The cables going to it aren't completely shrink wrapped, and the joystick is just raw dogging it with no cover. It's not like VR joysticks are known for drifting or anything. In fact, a lot of people were having problems with their joysticks right out of the box. The most common problem seems to be that the connector was coming loose during shipping. This is a user serviceable problem. You're able to disassemble the gloves to plug the connector in. Is it nice that you're able to do that? Yes. Should you have to do that the moment you get the gloves? Probably not. You may have noticed that most of the parts on the glove are 3D printed. I personally think the print quality looks alright, but that could always just be a cherry-picked review unit. Not that that matters anyways though, because they just recently switched to injection molding. Regardless though, I really wish they would provide some 3D print files so that you could just print your own mounts. Hardware-wise, I don't think they're awful. There's some cut corners, but they're also like half the price of any other gloves on the market currently. I've been using them for like 2 months now and nothing's broke on me, so that's a pretty good sign at least. What isn't good is their software. It's, how do I put this? God-awful, terrible, shouldn't have been released with a consumer product? You gotta download it first though, and where might that be? On their website with the software for the rest of the stuff they sell? Try again. It's an exe file that can only be found in their Discord server, because that's where that should be. Opening it up, there's a 50-50 chance that it'll just launch in Chinese, even if it was previously set to launch in English. Don't worry, changing the language requires restarting the program. The main menu has no words, just symbols with no explanation for what any of them do. Thankfully, the settings menu does have words, so let's do the initial calibration we need to do for the gloves to work. There's an auto calibration, which sounds great, except it just doesn't work for some of my fingers. On both of my hands, the middle and ring fingers didn't calibrate correctly, so I had to go in and manually adjust the curves for them. That is a contender for the most obnoxious thing that I have ever had to do with a piece of VR hardware. Setting up the controller's tracking is also really annoying, at least with Lighthouse devices. First of all, it just doesn't save which devices you set for tracking, so every time you turn everything on, you have to set that. But then you also need to make sure you have your offsets set correctly so that your hand's actually in the right spot. This menu is genuinely awful. Nothing is labeled besides what hand you're touching. No damn clue what lighthouse mode does because it doesn't seem to make any sort of difference. And the coordinate system is undefined, so you're guessing at first. There are some offsets for certain devices built into the program, but they're not under this menu for some reason. They're actually under this drop-down menu that's on the main page. Even then, there's not offsets for all of the mounts they sell. If you're using Vive or Tundra trackers, you have to go back into their Discord to find the values and manually input them. They still don't have values for all of the mounts they sell though. For example, if you're using a Valve Index or DPVR E4, you can buy a mount, but there's no offsets for it. Good luck making your own, because I genuinely have not been able to make any sense of this menu myself. After all that, the gloves are finally usable. Until you open VRChat at least. Trigger and grip are bound to gestures, and they work consistently for me. The joystick and buttons, despite how small they are actually way more usable than I was expecting. I've played through some Alex, some rounds of Contractors, Pistol Whips, and Synth Riders, and I've been enjoying them. But let's be honest here, most people looking to buy VR gloves are SocialVR players, and of all the SocialVR games, VRChat is by far the most popular. Isn't it great that VRChat's the game these gloves perform the absolute worst with? VRChat's hand gesture controls are active with these gloves. You can disable the locomotion stuff, but even then, the trigger/selection gesture is still active. This means that every time your virtual index finger touches your virtual thumb, a trigger is inputted. This causes double firing, and at times it seems like this is the only trigger input VRChat wants to accept, completely ignoring the gesture bound by the gloves. I don't really understand why there is no option to disable this input. On the flip side, these gestures should not be active with these gloves, and they're only active with these gloves because HIG themselves is sending too much data. They're sending full skeletal input data when they should only be sending partial because they don't support splay. I really don't understand how no one on the dev team caught this. To me, it kind of seems like they just don't use the product themselves. They didn't even seem to know what was causing it. I was the one who let them know. And at first, a member of their team thought it was a hardware defect with my gloves, and they said I should open them to swap around two wires. I paid a discounted price for a review unit. I am not a beta tester. This was not a pre-launch review unit. This was a post-launch review unit where major things like this should have been ironed out. I should not have been the person who was corresponding with third parties to try and figure out what the issue was, and HIG should have read VRChat's driver guide. Considering they were aware there was a problem with VRChat, they just didn't know what it was. To release a product in this state is honestly just kind of embarrassing. Problem 2. Calibrating full body tracking also gets wonky. HIG does not disable the tracking point that you're using to track the glove from showing up as a tracker to Steam VR. This means that you have 2 points of tracking on your hand, one for the glove's emulated controller and one for the device used for the tracking. This means if you like to T-pose to calibrate your full body in VRChat, one of those points of tracking usually ends up getting bound to your elbow, causing it to twist around all weirdly. There really should just be a button to disable the trackers from showing up as trackers, because that's what every other glove on the market allows you to do. To get around it for now, you can put your arms straight out like this when calibrating, or there's also a launch argument that allows you to hide certain trackers from VRChat. Oh, also remember, hardware-wise, I don't think they're awful. Yeah, well, I stopped thinking about it once I started looking at them a bit harder. The Vive tracker mounts have these little, metal pieces that hold it in place, but one of mine fell out because there's no adhesive there. PenPal had one of these screw threads fall out and into the glove. I just don't know what to say. HIG themselves really need to get their priorities straight. As of making this video, it has been over 2 months.
Wrong. So I've actually been working on this video for like way too long, but they have put out updates. One where they changed a file preset path. 2 months in between that, great development time, guys. And then one where they created an OSC output program that's completely separate from the main program that lets you send the gloves like finger curl data to VRChat over OSC
since they last put out a software update for the trackers. Most of the problems in the software have been present for far longer. Sure, they're currently working with me to try and fix some of them, but is that going to continue to happen when they don't have a reviewer up their ass to get them to fix it? That is unclear. There's even other stuff that I just didn't mention because it isn't relevant to VR. For example, there's a VMC mode, but it just doesn't work, so why is it there? How did that get implemented? How did that get pushed to production? I also love the fact that they're advertising these things as better finger tracking for VRChat, when they don't even work well for VRChat currently. So are the HigVR gloves worth it? Right now, no. Sure, they could fix some of the issues, but with the pace they've been moving at, there's probably just gonna be something better out by the time they have these things in a usable state. I don't want to come off as mean, but I don't understand the thought process of sending a product in this state out to reviewers. Like, did they expect a glowing recommendation from me when the software barely functions? Even once you get it functioning, the gloves just don't work correctly with VRChat. And they just add more friction into my setup because they don't save the tracking points that I previously selected. Even with updates, I just don't know if I can see these things replacing my index controllers, and the only thing the Hig gloves have really accomplished is making me wish I had a better pair of gloves. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. It helps me out a lot and allows me to continue buying trashy and non-trashy VR hardware to show off on my channel. If you want to take it a step further, consider becoming a channel member or throwing a few bucks my way with a super chat. Only if you really want to, though.